This is the story of a dream many boys secretly cherish, an adventure filled with survival and discovery. Our protagonist's ship meets a tragic accident, leaving him stranded on a remote, deserted island with nothing but his instincts and a girl for company. But fate isn't all cruel. He's armed with a survival system that takes care of his basic needs like food, water, and shelter. From starting fires to building shelters, hunting animals to taming a wild bear, growing plants to discovering other survivors, and even advancing civilization to new heights. This story is a roller coaster of survival and progress. Oh, and don't forget building a raft and setting out to explore the unknown. Ready to dive into this gripping journey? Let's see how it all begins. The scene opens on a cruise ship where a lively party is in full swing. Gao is confessing his feelings to Lin, and the crowd around them is eagerly encouraging her to accept him. Everyone is recording the moment, creating an atmosphere filled with excitement and anticipation. But in the midst of all this, Qin Tian, our protagonist, is completely uninterested in the drama unfolding. He's engrossed in a live stream, where a man is casually chatting about heading home and meeting people last. Qin Tian shuts off his phone with a relaxed sigh, amused by the man's commentary, and thinks he could easily spend 24 hours watching it without getting bored. However, just moments later, he notices the weather starting to change, and it's rapidly getting worse. Out of nowhere, a fierce storm hits. Heavy rain pours down, and lightning strikes in every direction. The captain urgently instructs passengers to move indoors, as the storm grows more intense. As Qin Tian heads toward shelter, he realizes it's already too late. Panic sets in, and he begins running. A fellow passenger asks why he's rushing, but Qin Tian doesn't answer. Grabbing a life ring, he leaps into the ocean just before the ship starts to sink. Upon reaching the shore, the system activated, and the protagonist was presented with a newbie gift. However, since he was unconscious, the gift was temporarily stored in the system. When he finally regained consciousness, a wave of relief washed over him as he realized that the life ring had saved him from drowning. As he looked around, the island appeared deserted, with no sign of life anywhere. He hoped that the rescue and search team would arrive within 5 days, assuming nothing went wrong. However, he quickly understood that he would have to survive on the island for at least 6 to 7 days on his own. The island had a few coconut trees scattered around, and he figured that they could provide enough food and water for a week. He had watched a video earlier and bought a dagger, but he hadn't needed to use it so far. When he cut open the first coconut he found, it turned out to be old, with barely any juice inside. He quickly realized that, to get through each day, he would need at least 5 coconuts. As he drank the little coconut water he had, a thought crossed his mind. He remembered hearing something about the system while he was unconscious. Just as he was pondering this, a screen appeared in front of him, offering him the option to view his newbie gift. At first, he was taken aback, unsure of what to make of it. But then curiosity got the better of him, and he touched the gift icon. To his surprise, the gift contained 2 books, one on common plants and the other on common animals. He couldn't help but wonder what use these books would be to him on a deserted island. But then again, if this was all part of some strange game, maybe he would understand their value after spending more time here. As the system processed the gift, it began to integrate into him. He felt a strange sensation as some unfamiliar knowledge flowed into his mind. It was as if the books were implanted directly into his brain. The protagonist realized that the system's books were now part of him, giving him instant knowledge about the plants and animals around him. Suddenly, a piercing scream broke through the silence. Startled, the protagonist's mind raced. Was there someone else on the island? Without wasting a moment, he dashed toward the source of the sound. There, he saw a snake slithering dangerously close to Lin, a student from his school. She was desperately screaming for help, her voice trembling in fear. Without hesitation, the protagonist sprang into action. He grabbed the snake, swiftly smashed it onto a tree, and killed it with a quick, decisive motion. Afterward, he didn't even glance in her direction. Lin, still in shock, asked who he was, but the protagonist coolly replied, "Put on your clothes first." He had no intention of making the situation more uncomfortable than it already was. Realizing the awkwardness of the moment, Lin, feeling embarrassed, told him not to look. Once she had dressed, Lin couldn't help but reflect on the bizarre turn of events. She had been drying her clothes after her swim in the sea, never imagining she would encounter a snake. As she looked at the protagonist sitting calmly with a coconut in hand, she was struck by how self-reliant and composed he seemed. especially after rescuing her from such a terrifying situation. She began to wonder if maybe Qin Tian hadn't checked on her yet because she hadn't been in her best condition when he found her. Introducing herself as a university student, Lin was surprised and pleased to learn that Qin Tian attended the same university. Her joy was evident when she reached out and took his hand, feeling a warmth she couldn't quite explain. After taking a sip of coconut water, she commented that it was a little sour, but quickly added that her thirst was far stronger than the taste. Qin Tian, however, seemed taken aback. He hadn't expected Lin to drink more water than he had himself, and her sudden thirst left him a little surprised. Then, he asked if there was any way to contact someone else, like a mobile phone. Lin answered with a sad smile, explaining that all her belongings had been swept away into the sea when she fell off the cruise. Despite the harsh situation, she tried to comfort Qin Tian, saying that thousands of people had died in cruise accidents before, and yet, the rescue and search teams always arrived eventually. So, they could hold on to that hope. The protagonist couldn't help but marvel at how someone could remain so confident and calm in such a dire situation. He suggested that while they waited for the rescue team, it might be a good idea to set up a campfire for the night. Not only would it help keep them warm, but it would also keep away insects and snakes that might be lurking in the dark. Lin agreed with the plan, but immediately asked how they would even start the fire. Qin Tian smiled and explained that starting a fire was actually a skill, one that he had learned over time. He patiently explained how to use wood and sticks to create a spark, and also mentioned that since they were near the shore, they might be able to find something washed up from the cruise, like a lighter or some other useful items. They spent the next hour searching the beach, but sadly, they didn't find anything. Qin Tian couldn't help but think that Lin was probably right. Since their route wasn't far, and the island was uninhabited, there had to be something they could use. But as far as the protagonist could see, the area looked completely clean, almost untouched by anything. Just when hope started to fade, Lin's sharp eyes caught a glint from a shiny object. It was a plastic bottle, lying on the sand. As she got ready to throw it aside, Qin Tian suddenly stopped her. With a thoughtful look, he explained the significance of the bottle. He told her that they could use it to start a fire, as it had the potential to amplify the sun's rays and create a spark. The protagonist carefully gathered some sticks and leaves, then used a bottle to concentrate sunlight on a single spot. It took patience and effort, but eventually, he managed to ignite a small flame. As the fire crackled to life, Lin's face lit up with relief and excitement. It was a victory in the face of their growing challenges. That evening, the two sat beside the bonfire, its warm glow pushing away the shadows of the night. Lin stared into the flames, her mind occupied with thoughts of rescue. The protagonist noticed that Lin seemed quieter than usual, her earlier optimism now replaced by a shadow of doubt. He could sense her frustration and weariness, especially after their efforts to find supplies had been fruitless. Recognizing how crucial it was to stay hopeful in their situation, he decided to lift her spirits. He gently reminded Lin of her earlier words, that the rescue team would likely arrive within 3 days. With confidence, he assured her that they would be home within a week. He pointed out the abundance of coconut trees on the island, explaining that they wouldn't have to worry about food. Even if we only drink coconut water, he said, we can survive for at least a week. The reassurance seemed to lighten her mood, but their survival efforts continued. The protagonist then picked up the snake they had earlier encountered, along with his knife. Lin, curious but apprehensive, asked what he was planning to do. Without hesitation, Qin Tian began cutting the snake. Alarmed, Lin asked anxiously, "Are you planning to roast and eat it?" He nodded calmly, explaining that they now had a source of meat to sustain them. But Lin's reaction was immediate. She shook her head firmly and said, "I can't eat snake meat, no matter what. Even if I go hungry, I won't eat it." Her expression made it clear that her resolve wasn't going to change. The protagonist paused, clearly perplexed by her refusal. He wanted to argue, to convince her that this was a practical solution, but he chose to let it go for the moment. Instead, he quietly focused on preparing the snake meat, determined to make use of every resource they had. When Qin Tian cooked the meat and took his first bite, his eyes lit up with surprise. "This is really tasty," he exclaimed, savoring the flavor. Lin, who had been hesitant to try it, watched him closely. She was unsure at first, but the sight of Qin Tian enjoying the meal piqued her curiosity. Finally, she gave in and took a bite. To her surprise, the meat tasted much better than she had imagined. She nodded in approval, admitting it was good. Qin Tian felt a deep sense of gratitude. If it weren't for the snake they had caught, they would have gone to bed hungry, with their energy further drained. The warmth of the bonfire and the satisfying meal gave him a small but much-needed sense of accomplishment. As he leaned back, his attention shifted to the system screen hovering before him. To his surprise, it suddenly closed on its own. Confused, he tried to figure out what had happened, but couldn't find a way to reopen it. Just as he was beginning to worry, the screen flashed back into view. This time it showed a notification: 100 points earned for creating a bonfire. Qin Tian froze in shock, staring at the message. He hadn't expected the system to reward him for something so simple. Lin noticed his reaction and frowned slightly. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Qin Tian quickly composed himself, brushing it off with a casual smile. "It's nothing, just thinking about something," he said, avoiding her gaze. Internally, he couldn't shake the thought. Was the system only visible to him? Why was it acting so mysteriously? Lin sighed in relief. "You scared me for a moment. I thought something dangerous was about to happen," she admitted. Qin Tian reassured her with a calm tone. "Don't worry, there's no danger. I'm sure someone will come to rescue us soon." Despite his confident words, his mind was racing. The system was clearly a powerful tool, but he realized it also came with risks. He glanced at Lin, who was now poking at the fire absent-mindedly. A thought crossed his mind. What if she discovered the system? Could he trust her to keep it a secret? Qin Tian knew the information was dangerous. If it leaked, it could attract unwanted attention or even put them both in greater danger. This realization made him cautious. He decided he needed to tread carefully, not just with Lin, but with anyone he might encounter. For now, the system was a secret, and he intended to keep it that way, no matter what. He began checking the tasks and quickly realized that the entire setup felt like a game. This piqued his curiosity, and he decided to see what he could do with the 100 points he had. Diving into the system store, he found an array of items available, but there was a catch. He could only guess their functions from their names, as no detailed descriptions were provided. As he browsed, one particular item caught his attention. It was labeled as an 18+ item, which made it instantly intriguing. His mind wandered. Could this be something extraordinary? Or was it just a gimmick, completely useless to him? Either way, it sparked a moment of excitement. However, his enthusiasm dimmed when he noticed the prices. Even the cheapest items required a minimum of 2,000 points, far beyond what he currently had. Feeling a little disappointed, he decided to explore further, hoping to find another way to earn points or unlock something interesting. But after rummaging through the system module, he realized there wasn't even an option to accept new tasks at the moment. After some time, both decided to lie down and rest. As they settled in, Qin Tian shared his struggle with surviving on coconuts alone. He explained that while coconuts provided carbohydrates, they lacked the protein his body desperately needed. He also suggested they should explore the land the tomorrow day. He proposed searching along the coastline for shrimp, especially during low tide when it would be easier to find them. As the protagonist glanced over at Lin, he noticed she was already fast asleep. Her peaceful expression made it seem as though she wasn't overly concerned about their current predicament. The protagonist decided not to disturb her and resolved to discuss his plans with her the next day. In the middle of the night, the cold breeze stirred the protagonist from his sleep. He shivered, realizing how chilly it had become. As he looked around, his eyes fell on Lin, who was curled up nearby, visibly trembling from the cold. Concerned, he moved closer and gently tried to wake her up. However, as soon as Lin opened her eyes, she panicked. Startled, she quickly scooted away, her face filled with fear. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice laced with suspicion. The protagonist tried to explain his intentions calmly, but Lin wasn't ready to listen. Instead, she accused him, her tone sharp. "I thought you were a decent person, but you're just a pervert." Her words stung, but the protagonist chose not to argue. Turning his gaze toward the fire, he spoke in a measured voice. "If you don't want to freeze, your only option is to sit near the fire. The choice is yours." Reluctantly, Lin found herself sitting by the fire, its warmth offering a small comfort against the biting cold of the night. The protagonist observed the strange temperature difference, noting that the shift from day to night was more extreme than he had expected, especially considering their proximity to the equator. Though they were so close to the equator, the temperature drop was sharp and unexpected. Lin, unprepared for such a chill, hadn't brought any thick clothing with her due to the warm climate they had anticipated. As they both shivered, the protagonist suggested that they sit closer together to share body heat. Otherwise, they'd both freeze. Lin, feeling awkward at first, declined, but after a brief moment of hesitation, she felt a sense of uncertainty creeping in. She had never been this close to a guy before, and the thought of doing so now made her nervous. If it weren't for Qin Tian, she probably wouldn't even have had the fire to keep her warm. After a few moments of inner conflict, Lin finally decided to take off a few of her layers and told Qin Tian not to look. The cold air nipped at her skin, and her mind wandered to scenes from movies where people huddle together for warmth in situations like this. It was strange, yet somehow comforting. The protagonist, sensing her discomfort, quickly reassured her. He told her there was no need to remove her clothes, as they were both in the same situation with inadequate clothing. Instead, he suggested they simply sit close together and share the warmth. Without another word, Qin Tian moved behind her and wrapped his arms around Lin, offering the warmth of his body. It was a simple gesture, yet it gave her a sense of relief she hadn't expected. The night passed in silence, both of them holding on to each other for warmth. The morning light slowly spread across the sky, casting a warm glow on everything around. Lin, excited by the beauty of the sunrise, couldn't help but call out to Qin Tian, urging him to come and see the magnificent sight. As Qin Tian joined her, his eyes scanned the shoreline, noticing the tide was going out. He suggested they collect crabs now before the tide came back in. Lin agreed, and the two set off. As they worked, one of the crabs managed to bite Lin's hand. She winced in pain, but Qin Tian was quick to act. He grabbed a nearby rock, crushed the crab, and immediately checked on her. After a while, they had gathered a substantial amount. The protagonist carefully began removing the shells from the crabs, a process that caught Lin's attention. She was still feeling hungry, her stomach growling as a reminder, and she asked why he was taking the shells off when there was meat inside them. Qin Tian, with his usual calm demeanor, explained that the meat inside the shells was cold and could cause a stomach ache if eaten in large quantities. He added that the shells themselves were coated with gastric juices, which could be hard on the digestive system. The smell of the crabs roasting over the fire soon filled the air, and Lin couldn't help but remark on how wonderful it smelled. She mused aloud that it would be even better if they had some sauce to go with it. The protagonist, though, had other plans in mind. He told her they wouldn't be sleeping on the beach that night, suggesting instead that they build a camp to keep warm, away from the chilly sea breeze. Lin, always open to new ideas, suggested the forest as a perfect spot for the camp. Qin Tian agreed, pointing out that the area with abundant trees and materials would make it easier to build. They both seemed excited about the idea, and Lin asked if they could go to the forest after they had eaten. But Qin Tian, ever cautious, reminded her that they still had important things to do before venturing out. They needed to prepare fresh water and leave a distress signal for the rescue team, ensuring they would be found if needed. Though it made her eager to explore a bit less, Lin understood the importance of taking these precautions.